On today's episode, I talk with Colin Graham, who was the founding CEO of the Innovation Centre at the Sunshine Coast University. And after working with numerous startups and other businesses and people coming in through that centre, Colin now takes a much wider view of innovation and businesses in regions like the Sunshine Coast.
That's right, yeah.
Yeah. So, Colin, how do people contact you?
Okay, very easy. Number one would be just Google my business, which is Causeway Innovation. And number two is via LinkedIn.
So stay with us, because Colin and I have probably a longer conversation than what we normally do, which is fantastic because we cover some incredibly interesting topics around how regions like Nambour and other places move on from the old way of working to a new way of working. Thank you. Hello and welcome to Stories from the Red Couch. I'm Robin Cook and today my guest is Colin Graham. Welcome, Colin.
Thank you, Robin.
It's nice to have you here.
Good to be here in this couch.
Yeah. We hear a lot of conversation these days about entrepreneurs and innovation and unicorn businesses and so forth. I've been reading a couple of your recent blogs, and you talk in that about the need for towns and regions to reimagine themselves, but not necessarily as the next Silicon Valley. Can you talk a little bit about that?
Sure, yeah. Well, look, I think my big interest is in how can towns, cities, regions, almost everywhere in the world except the absolute biggest cities like the Londons, New York, Sydneys and so on, how can everywhere else really survive and thrive in this, I sort of call it new economy, but it's not really new, it's been happening for many, many years. So how can they survive and thrive in that? And a big part of that question, a big part of the answer is innovation. But I think the term innovation, all of associated terms, has been kind of mucked about a lot and misunderstood a lot in the last 10 years or more. I also think that having looked at this issue and thought about this issue for like probably about 20 years, I think a lot of thinking, a lot of action, a lot of programs, including in Australia, are very much based on what I just call the Silicon Valley model, which one of those blogs was about. So Silicon Valley is an amazing place. It's a vital part of the global economy, but it's not the only place in the world. Now, if you look at Silicon Valley, it's all about startups. It's all about technology, mainly high technology. It's all about big growth firms, getting venture capital investment. Some of the venture capital firms, they won't invest in a deal that's below about $5-10 million. They won't even look at it because it's too small for them, right? So, completely different world, really. Attracts talent from across the world, attracts investors, and it's pretty much dominated by young white men. That's what it's dominated by. Like, I've seen some of the figures by people, and in terms of like female founders, the figures vary, but it's usually around about 5%, that sort of number. Okay. And in terms of those type of ventures in Silicon Valley being funded, or people of color, particularly from African Americans and Latinos, it's less than 1%. So you go, well, that's a figure. Now, do we really want to copy that model? And I actually say to people, well, if you're sitting in a little small town, it's almost as silly as thinking, well, if we're in this small town, say it's Nambour or Maroochydore or Toowoomba or wherever, and we're saying we're going to be the next London. I think you may as well say that, because you're saying, okay, the River Thames will go here, let's start digging, and the Big Ben goes here, Buckingham Palace, get the Queen in, let's go.
Sure, it's just ridiculous.
It's totally ridiculous. Yeah. But whether people realise it or not, a lot of the innovation policies is actually unconsciously based on a Silicon Valley model. So it's about these tech firms, growth, big money.
So is that because we had the Industrial Revolution and that was the big thing.
It was pretty big.
Yeah, it was pretty big. and it's really stretched right across decades and decades and decades. Is Silicon Valley the next thing that we just see as
Yeah, Silicon
Do you
Valley.
think so?
What I say is Silicon Valley is a really, really important part of the economy, but there's lots of issues associated with it that I've mentioned. But also, even if you wanted to copy it, you can't copy it. Regions across the world have spent billions and billions of dollars trying to copy it. No one has successfully copied it because it's a unique set of ingredients.
Okay.
So Silicon Valley is like beyond the Industrial Revolution. It's currently the Economist ran an article recently called Peak Silicon Valley, which
Okay.
is suggesting it's at its peak or just beyond. It probably is. Silicon Valley has been a sort of innovation engine, and if you've got lots of really talented people, great ideas, they're all clustering there. Then the investors will cluster there, and it sort of goes, from strength to strength, as you can kind of imagine. And that's been part of this. It's beyond industrial economy. It's into sort of more innovation economy or knowledge economy, I would say. I think in the future it's still probably going to play quite a dominant role, but there's about maybe 15, 20 other locations around the world, like London, Tel Aviv, places in China and so on, that will also be very, very important. Probably not as high as Silicon Valley. But meanwhile, if you're back at the ranch, if you're back at anywhere that's not London or Tel Aviv or Sydney, etc., and you want to be in that race, I would say you're running in the wrong race. It's just the wrong race.
Yeah.
Because it's at this sort of pinnacle or leading edge of a lot of business, right? But meanwhile, there are many, many types of entrepreneurs, types of businesses, and I think a lot of them are very, very important and very, very valid in creating new jobs and opportunities. And they all do not need $50 million investment. So I think we have to rethink. So I think a lot of state and federal government policies in Australia, as I have been actually influenced quite heavily by the Silicon Valley mentality, and it's just wrong, in my opinion. Now, people, when I say that, sometimes people think, you're talking nonsense. But what I'm trying to say is that places like Silicon Valley, high tech, etc., are very important, right? But they're not the only important thing in the world.
It's not the only thing. We need diversity, don't we?
We need diversity. So I'm not criticising them and saying,
no,
cancel
but you're
them.
really championing diversity, because you're not going to find those same people in Nambour or Toowoomba or places
there
like
was
that.
a recent study I came across. I just came through my Twitter feed. I can't recall the source, but I remember it was a credible source, and it looked at thousands and thousands of inventions, which is not the same as innovation. It's different, but there's some parallels. Thousands and thousands of inventions, and it looked at which of them, where have they come from, and it came out that surprise, it was from clusters of geographic areas. It was from more white men and so on, and it was pretty clear that if you wanted to, they said if you want to quadruple your invention output in their case, and I think innovation would be similar. If you want to quadruple your innovation output, you've got to look at women, and you've got to look at people of all ages. You've got to look at people of colour. And so it's pretty crazy going heavy down a model which is about a very small percentage of people. Pretty crazy. Also, although some people are getting very rich and they're doing these unicorn businesses which are valued over $1 billion, but collectively they're not worth that much. All those unicorns together are worth less than 2% of the Standard & Poor 500. That's one index of key businesses. So you put all those unicorns together, they're worth less than 2% of this established business base, but guess who gets all the attention, right? So, but many of those businesses are things that we might be familiar with, like apps and social media and little bits of software. And they're all fine, but they're not actually going to change the world in many ways. And there's a person called Ross Baird of Village Capital who writes about this in a book called, I think it's called The Blind Spot. It says key sectors such as food, health, housing, etc., are being ignored in favour of, let's do an app that, finds you a better light bulb or something.
Yeah, for sure.
Or a better shirt or better clothes. They're all fine.
Yeah.
But there's many vastly important areas of the world that need some attention from entrepreneurs. And again, a lot of the traditional model doesn't focus on that. So we have to so for regions and cities, anywhere that if you're thinking a place like Nambour, just as one example, which is a fairly small regional town, it's got a history that was to do with agriculture and sugar mill. That history. So a place like that, you've got to think about what has to be understood is, okay, number one, what is going on in the world today? And then number two, how do we fit in and make a contribution and add value? What's our role in that? What industries, sectors, etc., in this modern economy can we be good at? So that's a key question. And there's other things that come from that, but I'll leave it at that for now, I guess.
And so in a small town like that, how do people come together to find their strengths in the town? How do you set up communication channels and support people to be honest around those things? Because I think that for some small towns there's a lot of grief and it's like dissatisfaction with how things have gone. How do you overcome that?
Yeah, I think there is grief is quite a good word, because it is partly a mourning for things past, and there's a natural period for that. I think part of you really do have to get over that, or else you're not going to just be mourning for the town. You're going to be mourning for businesses and industries and your own job. So you have to work through that. So I think one of the ways to work through that is by a better understanding of how the world works today. I think that really is essential. And I think it would be possible to have one or two sort of community sessions where you take some people from the community and get them to explain some things and educate on some issues. Perhaps use some examples of local organisations or businesses who are doing pretty incredible things, and they will be here, and to show them. But also just look at, let's get a few cool graphs, right? So there's cool graphs you can get that show. I use it sometimes. It shows like percentage of employment in agriculture, and it goes from about 1900 to today, and it's going
down.
Manufacturing is, and it's partly understanding these trends first of all and recognizing them, and that's part of it. And then understanding, well, where are the jobs of today, where are the jobs of the future? And you will find that more jobs of the future are in things like services.
Yes.
So also things like we were talking briefly earlier about retail. Retail is a sector that's going through massive transformations and will continue to do so. I just had an event earlier today where a bank was talking about statistics from credit card purchases on Sunshine Coast, and depending where you are on the coast, the percentage of retail expenditure online was between 12 and 20%. I can only see that increasing because you get some parcel delivery companies will get it to you almost like 2 days later, and pretty incredible returns policies, etc., etc. I think that's just going to increase. And just to complete my retail thing is that a lot of existing retailers, I'm going to be very frank, are not doing a good job.
That's right.
I regularly go to somewhere like Myers. I want to buy a pair of trousers. You've got this, you have to buy them. Right? And being a short Irish guy, you need a bit of help to get the right size and all that sort of stuff, right? And you can almost guarantee that in Myers and Sunshine Coast or in Brisbane, you can walk in and walk around the store, and you'll see 20 staff. Most of them are talking to each other, or filling in a clipboard or adding stock. And none of them are talking to you. So they've got fundamental issues in terms of their customer service. So the internet isn't killing them. Their own terrible customer service is injuring them badly. But retail as a sector has got lots of issues. It's also associated with, typically, with lots of part-time work, casual work, lower salaries, and so on. So I wouldn't be thinking that retail is going to save a community in most cases. Right? I wouldn't think it. I think you've got to look at what's special about a place. And I think you've got to ask, one, you've got to look at the numbers. I think you will probably fairly easily find, perhaps with the help of a council, for example, what's the numbers? I've seen it for some regions. You can go into ABS and see how many are employed in this key sectors. How's that changed from 2 years ago, whatever. What's the future employment prospects? What are the growth sectors? You can get a quantitative analysis. Like if you and I wanted to do that for NAMBO, in an hour or two, we could probably have the answers pretty clear as to what's declining, what's growing.
Yes.
And that's NAMBO. And then also look at what's the unique strengths. So I would have a look at what's the position here, one within the Sunshine Coast region. maybe it's a great place for people to live, maybe it's a great place for arts, maybe it's fantastic for entertainment, maybe there's some key industries like creative industries, clean tech, etc. But what are they? But also look at that global environment, because you have to plug in and play in the global economy. It's not just what do we do down this street. You've got to think wider.
Yes.
And I think part of that means you have to have a big focus on export-oriented businesses.
And export doesn't necessarily mean goods, does it?
Goods and services. Goods and services. Because if you can sell goods and services, first of all, outside your region, and then beyond that, outside your country, well, then that's bringing in additional money into your local economy that will circulate in your local economy. And if you've got somebody who's in a reasonably paid job, they might be earning $100,000 or something, they're probably going to help somebody with household cleaning, with
sure,
gardening.
So you're going to get that ripple effect.
You get the ripple effect, and some people say that ripple effect can be as much as 4 times.
Yes.
If you get a high-paying knowledge type of job, the ripple effect can be up to 4 times of that.
Okay.
So, i.e., 1 person there, 4 people in sort of more service roles, and not just house cleaning, but accountants, graphic designers, etc.
Yes.
So got to look at what's distinctive in your region, what's going on in the world. Have to look at some ideas, and then I think you've got to build on success. So it's very, very important to take a look around, and there are so many. What would you call them? Just sort of unsung heroes. Local heroes is a better phrase.
Yeah. Okay.
Local heroes that are really heads down, working hard, doing amazing work, getting recognition, across the country, across the world, but unknown locally.
Sure.
And I think locally we've got to celebrate those local heroes and raise their profile through events. Like, for example, you could do an event, you don't necessarily have to call it local heroes, but just using that as an example. Once a month for about 10 months, 2 people at a time, that's 20 people.
Yes.
Profile them, get a good video, put them online, get some media release.
So what would constitute a local hero?
I think it's just somebody who's doing good work, that is doing work that's something that's a bit different, that's maybe got clients across Australia, across the world.
Okay.
Somebody's doing something distinctive. Like in the past, I've run sessions along this line because I originally got the idea from Connect in San Diego in California. They called it Meet the Entrepreneur.
Okay, yep.
And the idea was just to profile local entrepreneurs.
Yeah.
Let them tell their story in a structured way. You give them a very, very good briefing. It's not just random.
Yes.
But give them a very good briefing. Try to bring out their lessons.
Yep.
But also, if somebody sees that, I think we were talking before, I was talking about, a company up at Bundaberg and run by Lorraine and Frank. And Lorraine, they've now got about 100 staff across Australia, about 60 in Bundaberg. They do medical software, and we brought them out. She spoke an amazing presentation about the hard work, tenacity, making things happen. They've got an Australian market-leading position in their software and New Zealand as well.
And they're in Bundaberg. That's great.
And beforehand, I was speaking to somebody who's going, Bundaberg's terrible, you can't do anything here, you can't get a decent internet connection. You go, well, what about this lady?
Yeah.
So you want to show some local heroes to show examples of success.
Okay. Do you also get that sharing of knowledge and learning for businesses, say for instance the local butcher or the local shoe shop, in terms of getting some innovation into those businesses as well?
Yeah.
What would innovation in those businesses look like?
I think you have to look at. I think you've got to look at innovation at all levels and all types of businesses. I really think it's important. And what innovation really means is about generating and implementing new ideas of value. That's what it's about. So it's not about startups, it's not about technology, people think it is, it's not. So it's about getting really good ideas and making them happen that add value to you, your business, the community. I think any business, like you take, like from the butcher or whatever you mentioned, has to take a look, because we've talked about retail and we've talked about the you could say they're threats, but you could also say they're opportunities in many sectors. People call it digital disruption. but it's also digital opportunities. So for a lot of local businesses that might service a market of 20, 30,000 people, once you get over the sort of grieving for times lost, etc., then you begin to look out and go, actually, there's a lot of opportunities here because we can access a global market, perhaps. So just the example I give is you look at bookstores. A lot of bookstores naturally have gone out of business, partly because of Amazon, etc., etc. But again, not just because of that. Like there's a great example I use in the courses about innovation. Mr. B's Emporium in Bath in England, amazingly successful independent bookstore because they build a community, they have regular events, they add a lot of value, and they're doing services like they've got a book spa. So you'd sit down on the couch like this with one of the booksellers, say, what are you interested in? And go, well, I don't know, Elvis or political history or Irish country houses or whatever, so they'd understand what you're interested in. And then they'd run about the shop
Get them for you.
and a big pile of 10 books and go, well, you might be interested. And they really know their books.
Yeah.
They know their product. They've ordered every one, right? And they go, this one might be cool. This one might be good. And you probably walk out with 5 or 6 of them, right?
Yeah.
So you've spent maybe $200 as opposed to my Myers example of walking in trying to spend $50, $100 on a pair of trousers.
And you just couldn't.
Just can't spend it because the service is so awful. And then that bookstore, they're also doing that book spa online.
Yes.
So you can go online and go, here's me, and what they'll do is they'll send you 1 book a month for, I think, 11 months. I think they missed 1 month for some reason. Or as a gift, you can go, well, let's get it for my husband. And you can specify the broad type of books, and they'll pick some cool books. And once a month, you'll get a little parcel, amazingly well wrapped up with a red wax stamp on it.
How beautiful.
That probably costs them 20 cents or something to do that, and a bit of ribbon or something. But every month, it's like your birthday.
Yes.
So individual bookstores or a butcher, if I was a butcher, you've got to be thinking about, what do we do in sausages? What do we do in burgers? What do we do about we're into barbecues?
And building that community.
Building that community.
Yeah.
And I think any business really got to think about building community.
Yeah.
The example I talked about before was Food Matters here in the Sunshine Coast,
Yes.
Australia. The 2 founders could have gone out as food nutritionists, got a little corner office somewhere down an alleyway, saw 6 or 8 people a day and walked home tired. But they decided to take their advice and so on and put it online. And they've built a community online with about 2.5 million people following.
I know, they're astonishing.
And I asked James, how did you do that? How did you build that community? He said, well, it's tough to start with to get the first 5,000, but I just put in my diary, Monday, Wednesday, Friday, post something useful.
Yes.
And he had to do it. So to me, it says, that's not a rocket science idea. That's a good idea and a disciplined approach to making it happen.
Yep.
Right?
And consistent and reliable for the people. There's an expectation.
And also, just go back to, you've got me in the butcher example now, is that any business has to spend some time thinking about what do our customers want, what are other people doing in Australia or around the world. On a course I run, we ask people to spend 10 minutes or so, say, okay, get your phone out or your laptop out, let's Google your business plus innovation. Let's see what we can find. Also, I use a little trick because we just look for PDF documents under advanced search. You can find
Okay,
PDF
just PDF.
documents because it cuts to some very interesting little answers, right? And so one of the businesses was a quarry, pretty straightforward, turn big rocks to little rocks, right? But they Googled quarries, innovation, and found lots of different answers in terms of process innovation, different ways to do things, how to add value, how to get more money for your little bits of rock, like what can you do with them? And I think every business that's serious should just start doing a bit of research. I don't know, a coffee shop in Cullen did this. There was a new coffee shop coming along and they were quite frightened they were going to wreck our business. And what the owners did in that case is they did a trip down to Melbourne, home of coffee, one of them, for 3 or 4 days, and they went to as many coffee shops as possible, all the cool ones, etc. Right? And each one they had their notepad thinking, what can we learn from this one place? One trip, 3 or 4 days, and they come back with a ton of ideas.
Yes.
Or you can do some online, right? Or you can use one of your do a busman's holiday to go visit somebody. So every business has to think about what can we do differently, because if they stay the same every year and everybody else is developing and improving by 2%, 3%, 5% a year, it's not going to be too long before their competition is here and they're way back here. So every business, every level, and also need to get some, as an individual and as a business, but also as a region, we have to invest dramatically more in education, dramatically more.
Yes.
We are doing a pretty bad job right now, I think, in terms of education, because there's a race between technology and talent, and technology is winning big time. And I think a lot of institutions, like universities, I don't know so much about schools and so on, but they're not keeping up with the pace. But also, if you're in the Sunshine Coast or in Noosa, we've got 40,000 businesses in that combined region. There's a lot of business owners there who need I bet you if you approach them and say, how much education have you had as to be an owner manager, managing director or whatever, I think the vast majority will come back with zero.
Yes.
Absolute zero.
Yeah.
So and they've finished TAFE, they've finished school, they've finished uni if they've gone to it, and they've got another 40, 50 years of their life and career ahead. And we have to think much, much more about how to invest in education for those people so that they and their businesses can survive and thrive, really simply. And I see far too many across Australia random, well-meaning events and courses, etc., which are not under any bigger structure. They're not necessarily related to needs.
So, and that's true. There are a lot of those, and I see it for myself because there's things that I'd like to do in my business, and there's a lot of advisors out there and business consultants. How on earth
Can you navigate that?
Yeah, how on earth can you cut through and find someone who is suitable for you?
I think there's a lot of. I've been thinking about this area because part of my conclusion in terms of the research I've done recently to help with this book I'm working on is that human capital, but just a bit more simply, people and their knowledge, skills, education, etc., motivation as well, is obviously the number one thing in terms of skills for a region. So we just have to look at across the board, how do we have an ongoing learning and development system? And I think parts of that would be, if you've got 40,000 businesses here, they're all important, but I'd probably start with a couple of thousand of the ones which are growing more and so on, because they could continue to grow and add more jobs.
Yes.
And there's a fairly big percentage, probably about 60% of businesses that do not want to grow, really, or not. That's wrong. Not don't want to grow, but they just employ themselves.
Yes, and they're happy to do that.
They're happy to do it. Now, maybe they do, maybe they don't want to grow, but I think an initial focus on, a few thousand businesses and business owners that want to grow. And what we need to do is we have to have a learning needs analysis of those people. We have to be able to come up with a recommendation of, here's some things you can do. And I think we need to create a learning matrix. I think we have to have a matrix of more structured learning opportunities in small batches. So here's export, here's marketing, here's new product development, etc. Building a team. I think we absolutely have to do more of that, and we really need. I think one of the things I'm working on is the idea of learning centres. So having a physical learning centre, because it's still very important to bring people together and have peer groups and build peer groups for long-lasting impact, but then also use that as a bit of an engine for the wider region and be able to deliver some services online also. And I think the regions that succeed will do that. A fantastic article in the New York Times about a year ago by Thomas Friedman, who's an excellent author. He travelled through part of the US for a short time, a week or two, to see all these areas that he thought were, kind of depressed and, people were on ice and so on. He wanted to see what's happening. And he went on and he saw different regions, and he said, at the end of the day, it doesn't matter if you're coastal, if you're big city, small city, two things you need. You've got to understand how the world works. You've got to understand how your community fits in and adds value. And he saw a lot of communities doing successful because they're investing in their people, investing in skills, And really, really importantly with young people, not just going out there irresponsibly saying, hey, you're all going to be the next Mark Zuckerberg, but actually helping young people get relevant skills so that they can go to an employer and add value, i.e. cost less than they make.
Yes.
And add value. And so a much greater emphasis on let's educate those businesses, plus let's educate younger people. And then finally, the final link in that process, bring these two together. And, you know, there's so many, we've got those 40,000 small businesses in the Sunshine Coast. Maybe there's, who knows the answer, maybe there's 5,000, 10,000 who could really employ somebody, right? You know, I bet you we could do a survey of school leavers and say, name one.
Yes.
Right? Name one. Or let's even more positively, let's name 5. I bet you very few could name them because we've got a vast array, and the world is the same, of small micro businesses who are almost unknown.
That's right.
So we've got to do a much bigger job about helping connect them to talent, including young talent, and helping that work. Because at the moment, a lot of these employment opportunities are invisible. They really are invisible. And we've got to do much more to realise that we've got that micro, small business type of community. And not go, oh my goodness, what do? We haven't got the big companies. Well, we go, that's life. Here's what we got.
That's right. Let's work on that.
Yeah, let's work on that. So there's just much more we can do. Dramatically a lot more we can do. Yeah. So.
Well, look, Colin, I reckon we could probably talk for an hour or more. Just hours on all of this. And I'd like to come back and revisit some of those ideas, particularly sometime through next year when we've seen some work that's being done in and around Nambour and these inner areas. But right now we're going to leave it. So thank you for coming. Thanks for joining us.
Thanks a lot. And
you've given me a whole bunch of ideas just in the work that I'm doing. So that's fantastic. And I think that you'll all have some ideas as well. How can people find you?
Easiest way is just through, Google my website, which is Causeway Innovation, or just Google or search for me through LinkedIn, Colin Graham through LinkedIn. You'll find me.
Okay.
And if you're connecting LinkedIn, just put a little message saying, hey, give me some message rather than just a random connection, right?
That's a funny thing, isn't it?
Yeah.
All right, thank you. Thanks for watching, and we'll see you next week. Dentist one day, and it was on factory floor, and he said the dentist